with leaders around the globe actively threatening a world war that could involve the United States, should Americans be bracing for the unimaginable? For those close to U.S. military operations, it comes as no surprise that the face of world war is changing right along the frightening development of new battle technologies, the likes of which the world has never seen. What are some of the emerging technologies that are redefining war, and how is that future technology going to impact civilian life? Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis joins us to answer these questions and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Skywatch Television. I'm Joe Artis Horn. Today, we continue a series that we've been holding over the last couple of weeks that comes to Americans as a warning in the form of a brand new book from Defender Publishing. But let me introduce first who's here. He's an expert on national security and foreign affairs whose service includes working on multinational programs for the Department of the Army at the Pentagon, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. Bob, it's so good to have you back this week. And of course, the warning that I'm talking about now resides in the brand new book, Preparing for World War III, a Global Conflict That Redefines Tomorrow. If you missed the last couple of weeks, go back to the archives wherever you watch Skywatch Television. Bob's basically been putting on a clinic that explains to the laity, those that don't have privy to the things that he knows because of his connections all throughout different layers of the military, why and how this common idea that Americans seem to have about the strength and might of America that maybe existed in the 50s and 60s, how that has deteriorated over the last few decades, and we're not as strong or as safe as we think we are. And of course, in this program, we're going to deal with some of the frightening technologies and also pivot to some of what civilians can do to ready themselves for the potential of a worldwide catastrophe, but also the things that we may be able to do as civilians to thwart this or to help those in power that are trying to thwart this disaster that we're dealing with. And we're also going to focus on what we as civilians can do, if there are things we can do to help embolden those that might hold positions of power in terms of supporting their efforts to thwart a potential World War III.
Right.
Bob, how should we as a country try to deter a world war? And is there anything that we as civilians can actually do?
Our national security strategy has what's called integrated deterrence. And deterrence is what are the elements of statecraft should we employ to discourage others from attacking us or to cause war. Theodore Roosevelt, when he was the governor of New York, had a saying that he took into Cuba and the Rough Riders and later as the president. And he said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Now, the big stick has always been the armed forces of the United States, but in a more of a collective deterrent way, it's all the powers, all the levers, all the tools in the toolbox of the federal government that we ought to put to bear to discourage that country. Now, some people only use sanctions. Some only use the military and shake the rattle. Others use diplomacy, and they can use cyber. They can use other techniques, capitalism, and so forth. So that's a big one. You need to recruit your allies to work with you economically, militarily, diplomatically, using the international organizations and the like. We also need to have a robust industrial base. Everybody knows we've depleted our industrial base in this country, and we can barely re-equip in a meaningful time. We did increase our production by 10% during the Ukraine war, but our arsenals are emptying too quickly, and we can't replenish them. We need to invest in that. I know Senator Wicker of Mississippi has a plan to do that, but it's going to be costly. We need to be smart in our spending, but at the same time, we need to be effective. That's part of it. I would say, what Mr. Trump did with Iran is a good illustration as to how to cripple a country and deter a country from unhealthy activities, using their proxies or attacking our key ally, the Israelis. He knew how to do it then, but that was only a couple instruments. So we need to get serious about deterrence, and we haven't. We need to, at the same time, prepare the possibility of international war again. but we should have equal effort in deterring one.
Bob, what are some of the emerging and frightening technologies that will be available in the future battlefield? And, right now we're kind of in a boom of AI technology being used.
Right.
If we were to go into a World War III, this would be the first time we would see that kind of technology implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Does our military already use AI, and how do you think it could impact a future war?
We have a lot of investment in AI, so do the Chinese and Russians. Chinese are arguably ahead of us. They're harnessing AI, with regard to obviously drones. What we're seeing, this is morphing all the time. On the battlefield, of course, in Ukraine, we're seeing AI, drive swarms of lethal drones against armor units and ground units and the like. So that's just the beginning. When you have most of your weapon systems, even your delivery of munitions and the recovery of wounded from the battlefield is operated by robotic AI mechanisms, then you begin to see a change in the type of battle, the risks that you take. And so it becomes more dangerous. Now, my concern would be that we're turning over too much, and they're making decisions that artificial intelligence should not make, especially on ethical issues, and we've been challenged by that. The Chinese could care less, I would argue, about that. We have demonstrated concern that we don't want this to get out of hand, and it could. It could make decisions for us in a short period of time. When we're challenged in a very critical time, perhaps we're first attacked, and our National Command Authority is located in the bunkers that are around the national capitals, and they're cut off from their satellites. They're cut off with their cyber bullets that have been defeating our critical infrastructure. They have to make decisions as to deploy troops. Now, do they turn it over to the AI? That's a possibility, because that's part of where we're moving to. It's very, very frightening. We may end up, losing a lot of people because we've turned over decision-making that should be an ethical decision to a machine that may not have the same decision matrix that we would follow.
Right.
When you look at where we're at, I know we touched on this a little bit. What does this look like in terms of civilian population? I mean, even though we are depleted, as you've asserted, is there still at least a layer of, it's a wounded dog, but it'll still bite. I mean, it's diminished, but they are still mighty enough. There's a layer of mutual destruction that is a deterrent from wanting necessarily to engage in a World War III? Or do you think that they look at us now in our most vulnerable, maybe for the last 50 years, place and think, well, if you were going to do something, now would be primo season?
Well, we are vulnerable. We have capability, though. We're not completely toothless.
Right.
The ISIS illustration you used, Joe, is interesting because as a war planner, you have certain assumptions. You assume the size of the force, you assume the capabilities of the enemy, and then you say, well, if the president says, I want to destroy him, well, just give me more resources and I'll go and destroy him. Remove the rules of engagement or change the rules of engagement, and then, they won't be a problem anymore. But that was a small problem, technically. We could do that. Now you're talking big stuff. You're talking
Right.
China, 1.4 billion people. You're talking Russia with all its weapons and so forth. That's a little more difficult to deter using that sort of mindset. No doubt, here in this country, we have a weakened will. We are not ready to sacrifice. It's devastating what hurricanes do, but look at how long it's taken us to recover just a slice of our country from a hurricane. Terrible. Just imagine if that were to attack a major city like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. You just blank out with a single 10 KT nuke, all their electronics. They can't talk. Nobody, you talk about chaos. I've lived in Alaska for a number of years. I've been in 75 below zero out in the cold, outside for weeks at a time. I've been without electricity, but there's a point in which even the best of us have a hard time. This country is incredibly soft.
Yes.
So we have to become
Yes.
more resilient. We have to harden our infrastructure. If we really think that this is a threat, and I do, people don't like us. I know that's hard for Americans who don't have passports that have never gone overseas, but they do hate us.
Yes, they
want
do.
They want our riches. That's why people are flooding our border to come in here and to rob us of everything we have.
Yeah.
So think about what's happening in our southern border and how this has really affected our country, and then just realize the rest of the world, to a large degree, would like to have what we have, and they could care less if they kill us in the process.
Right.
The Russians and the Chinese, North Koreans, the Iranians, and others are much in that same mindset.
Right.
Only the guard at the door keeps you from coming in and doing whatever they want to your
Right.
family.
Right.
So we need to wake up, recognize the threat, and then prepare for it.
So, Bob, in your book, Preparing for World War III, A Global Conflict That Redefines Tomorrow, I know that you have some sage advice in here. So you've done a great job putting on this framework that organizes for the layperson all of these massive dilemmas that our military is up against, and all of the resources that they've allowed over decades to become depleted, and we're weak and our society is vulnerable. But there's also the need to be prepared for the worst. And to whatever degree a person can, maybe put aside some provisions. Does a person have to become a wild, radical prepper? I know a lot of times people, they struggle financially. And they say, well, I can't even afford these 30-year food supplies. It's $5,000 for two people for, X number of months or whatever. Is that the kind of prudent planning that we need to be thinking about? Or are there other things that we can do to be ready for the unthinkable?
Well, we address secret hiding places. Of course, that's what they had in southern Israel that saved a lot of lives. We used to, when I was a small boy, we were concerned about a nuclear attack. In schools, we would evacuate, we'd hide under a desk, and then lots of fallout shelters were built. I think we're going back, unfortunately, to a certain degree like that. Yeah, you need a plan. You need a plan against if a tornado like they do around here happens.
Right.
What are you going to do? Maybe you need to have an underground shelter, as a last resort. If, in fact, you get to a point that the food is scarce and you happen to have a stock of food, do you think your neighbors might know about it? Might they go after you? Should you form a militia? A lot of states don't allow independent militias that are not under the control of government. I'm not advocating, that necessarily, but under severe circumstances, especially if you're occupied by a foreign power, those sorts of things do emerge, and we've seen that historically.
For sure
through the
they will.
ages. I have an entire section in there that gives you the history from the last 1,000 years in which, civilians have been directly impacted by
Right.
occupying forces. And it's miserable. I mean, it's worse than not having enough food and electricity. I mean, it's much worse. And so you have to look at the history of mankind. Man is fundamentally sinful. We
Yeah.
do terrible things to one another.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it, but, the atrocities are real. And so
Right.
are we going to that? I don't want to go to that. I don't want to even think about that. I don't want to have to put away stuff. But is it prudent? You should do some. How many of us can apply the right sort of first aid? I mean, something beyond a simple cut.
Right.
What if you're wounded?
Yeah,
What if
exactly.
you have a collapsed lung? What if your foot is dangling?
Right.
Very few people know how, like an EMS, to treat that sort of
Right.
stuff in an emergency, much less if you don't have acute care available at a local
Right.
hospital that's shut down because they don't have electricity, water, and doctors.
We saw that during the hurricane. A lot of people
That's
were
right.
trapped from trees and
They had no access.
Yeah.
So, yes, you prepare for emergencies, but if we are trending in the direction of that, of some sort of occupation, but if they cut off our electricity, they cut off our water, they cut off our food because we don't have fuel and so forth, which is not totally out of the question, then what do we do?
Right.
Everything you're saying is absolutely factual. In fact, we as a family saw this years ago. One of the reasons we got out of the survival and prep industry business with Survivor Mall was because of the stress that came along with people waiting until after an event. Fukushima about murdered us emotionally.
Yeah.
People were worried. They were buying these little devices that were chirping and suggesting there might be radiation in the air, and you could not get things like potassium iodide,
Right.
water purification, masks, NIOSH masks. Like, we could have done really well as a business model if we could have pre-stocked. But then we had friends that were actually supplying the government saying, hey, Joe, you're a tiny, tiny little vendor. The government has requisitioned the very thing you want to buy from me to sell at your website.
Yeah.
And the answer to, an ETA was like, well, yeah, I don't know, check back in 6 months. Like, it's gone. So
Right.
what he's saying is absolutely true. Put aside some water purification stuff, maybe some basic MREs that would last you. They used to say 3 months, Bob. I don't know if you agree with that, but they used to say within 3 months, you'll either be able to relocate away from whatever the danger was, or FEMA will have come to provide relief.
Sure.
Or circumstances are so dire that you're fishing. Like, it was 3 months, because anything beyond that, you have to do something anyway. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the time to understand what the global powers that be are planning to unleash in an effort to perpetuate continued conflict on the world stage, regardless of the changing of presidencies or the will of citizens. Skywatch TV urges you to take advantage of the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection. This incredible collection includes not only Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis' new book, Preparing for World War III, A Global Conflict That Redefines Tomorrow, but it also includes his best-selling book, Progressive Evil, How Radicals Are Redefining America's Rights, Institutions, and Ideals, Making Her Globally Irrelevant for the End Times. Now, you'll receive both of these urgently needed works, but that's not all. You'll also receive the Shadowland book and companion DVD that exposes everything from Jeffrey Epstein to the Clintons to the occult elite and reveals the deep state actors at war with Christianity, Donald Trump, and America's destiny. These best-selling features are both by the internationally acclaimed best-selling author, Dr. Thomas Horn, with foreword by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $85. Yours now for your donation of only $45, which includes free shipping to all U.S. orders. You can support the ministry of Skywatch TV and help us continue spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the four corners of the world right now by scanning the QR code on your screen, using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. Visit us at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection right now. It's not a special opportunity that you're going to want to miss.
I got to ask a question, because the day after 9/11, the day after the Twin Towers, we had record-breaking church attendance. Record-breaking. We still have never seen that many churches packed. It was standing room only. We had celebrities that you would never imagine that would put themselves in a position to come across Christian, spiritual, God-fearing in any way, standing there on the news, live, praying for people's welfare. When the world gets scared, people do become a lot more open-minded to God, to Jesus, to whatever kind of provisionary intervention that he could offer us in the time of disaster. What I want to know is, since we've been talking about all of this preparation, how should Christians, how should the Christian body of Christ prepare for what is coming?
On 9/11, I was in Washington, D.C., and the streets went vacant. I heard the sirens. I heard the explosion at the Pentagon. Because I was a media person, I was on Fox News several times. I did probably 30 radio programs and then went back to Fox that night. I saw the Pentagon burning, saw the Twin Towers. I was in a meeting falling. The anxiety was terrible. And I don't think I've seen the nation as humbled at that point.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And so, yes, people didn't know what to do, so they went to church. They began to pray. People, I felt open to be very evangelical in my responses and to call for prayer, even on television, which I did.
Right.
The future we're talking about here could be much worse, and I think it will bring people back to their knees because they'll be desperate. There won't be food. There won't be a communication. Their children, where are their children? They won't know these sorts of things. So it's going to be terrorizing. I think of the material that I have in the book about Christians caught in the war zone in Ukraine, how the pastors were killed, how the congregants were wounded, or they were fingerprinted and they were ostracized. Yeah. They didn't have food. They were terribly desperate. But there was an element that turned to the Lord and really became orthodox or very, very serious about being faithful to God's calling. And I think that's what happens in when we have revival in this country. We've seen it a number of times. People got absolutely desperate, recognized that they're just humans. They can't control the world, so they turn it over to God. And unfortunately, it happens, and we know it. It happens when we reach our end, and we have to turn to God. Right. And so I see that in here. And certainly in the chapter that I deal with, the prayer life, coming to Christ if you don't know the Lord, being faithful to share the good news when there's nothing else to share, even food. These are things that I think we need to be serious about. The church needs to be serious about. Yeah. The church has always been good about helping the downtrodden. Well, these are the most downtrodden times that we're talking about. So I think that's where we need to really think about. I have a section in there, and I've got to mention, about being a Christian warrior. And I wrestled with that when I was a young lieutenant in Korea. And a lot of people don't understand, the scriptures with regard to the call to arms for a Christian warrior. I deal with the prayer life that we need to have. Right. I deal with, the whole prophetic issue as to, is this the end times? I don't know. It could be, and I praise the Lord that it will be, because I don't like this. Right. This is uncomfortable. All this death and dying. Most of us Americans don't see that, but having been to a few war zones, it's not a pleasant sight. Right. There's a little girl I quote in there that she was in Syria and she was going to Lebanon and she had to pass bodies that had no heads and arms. And she asked her grandfather, what did they do? And he said, they were bad people. And she says, I still prayed for them. The world's mean. Yes. And that's why we need a Savior. Yes. And so, whether it's a world war or a national catastrophe or it's a crisis in your family, it's the same answer. We turn to Christ. We have so many days. Don't know how many I'll have. Don't know how many you'll have. Right. The Lord does. And so we just surrender to that. And we have to recognize that we're human, but we're also got a soul. Right. And that soul's going to live with Christ forever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Israel forgot the Lord their God, and there was famine and death and war. And then Israel remembered the Lord their God, and there was prosperity and surplus. It is the human condition to get comfortable, to entertain ourselves, to forget about God. And then when things get frightening, oh Lord, where are you at in my life? It's just the ever rolling of humanity is to turn away and then to return. And so when you're talking about the prospects of another world war, I'm open to the fact that it may be something God permits even post Donald Trump's inauguration because of the forces that are insistent that it happen, specifically to drive people back to him through something like an actual revival. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are completely out of time. But Bob, before we dismiss, I just want to thank you personally, everybody here in studio. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis is one of the few gems that we have deep in these circuits where he's surrounded by swamp creatures, and he has been bold, he has spoke the truth, he has continued at the risk of his own career and his own life to speak the truth and to make the world, even Fox News, he's on secular TV, he's everywhere, and he still courageously preaches the truth and the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So one more time, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. For everybody here in studio, everybody on panel, Bob, thanks once again. I'm Joe Artis Horn. Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void.
One of the questions that I've been confronted with is in regards to the age of the earth.
Is the earth young? Is it old? The answer is yes.
There is far more to calculating the Earth's age than just radiocarbon dating. The problem with saying that someone is trying to make the Bible agree with science is that it assumes the Bible and science are two unrelated topics when they're not.
There's a hint there that something happened between Genesis 1 and 1:2 that caused the earth to become void.
There was a destructive event that reduced the earth to a place of desolation and chaos.
That phrase, tohu wabohu, is used in connection with God's judgment, which suggests that perhaps there was a creation before the creation of the garden.
We have a story of ruin and disgrace that is succeeded by a story of grace and God's love for man, which is so widespread that it's going to repair the entire broken solar system, maybe, who knows, the entire broken universe.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the time to understand what the global powers that be are planning to unleash in an effort to perpetuate continued conflict on the world stage, regardless of the changing of presidencies or the will of citizens. Skywatch TV urges you to take advantage of the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection. This incredible collection includes not only Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis' new book, Preparing for World War III, A Global Conflict That Redefines Tomorrow, but it also includes his best-selling book, Progressive Evil, How Radicals Are Redefining America's Rights, Institutions, and Ideals, Making Her Globally Irrelevant for the End Times. Now, you'll receive both of these urgently needed works, but that's not all. You'll also receive the Shadowland book and companion DVD that exposes everything from Jeffrey Epstein to the Clintons to the occult elite and reveals the deep state actors at war with Christianity, Donald Trump, and America's destiny. These best-selling features are both by the internationally acclaimed best-selling author, Dr. Thomas Horn, with foreword by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $85. Yours now for your donation of only $45, which includes free shipping to all U.S. orders. You can support the ministry of Skywatch TV and help us continue spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the four corners of the world right now by scanning the QR code on your screen, using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. Visit us at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Preparing for World War III Hyper Collection right now.